Dr. Alejandro Junger, welcome to the podcast. I'm thrilled to welcome you.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and I'm very excited to have this discussion with you. I was first introduced to you through Gwyneth Paltrow talking a lot about your work and your detoxification and how she's benefited from it. And I know we're going to have a really robust discussion today on detoxification, best practices, fasting, Ayurvedic medicine, and sort of the integration of Eastern medicine and, Eastern philosophy and Western medicine and philosophy. Before we do, I thought it would be, and I love to really just understand, the human that I'm speaking to and your origin story, because it's very interesting. You're a traditionally trained, allopathically trained cardiologist, very well known now as a functional medicine provider with this deep understanding in Ayurveda and detoxification and fasting. So maybe walk me through what that path is like. And we've had cardiologists on the pod before, and it's just so intriguing to me, this sort of wake up that seems to happen for those who are willing to awaken. So talk to me a little bit about your journey and your path.
Yeah, I grew up in Uruguay, where I went to medical school, and life in Uruguay was very healthy by default. There were no supermarkets, like in the United States with tons of products and stuff. My mom used to prepare all our meals from scratch. We used to buy the food in the farmers markets. That's just because there was no other option. And so life was very healthy by default. That we lived together as a family. We had our meals together. It was very old school and simple life. And we were all very healthy. And then I graduated from medical school and I moved to New York, and then life changed drastically. My schedule was crazy. My family was not around. I barely knew anybody. Was running around like a chicken with no head, 24/7, 365. I was on call 3 days in a row. Like in the old times. Now there's laws that don't allow that. But when I was training, we were on call for 3 days in a row.
You were the sacrificial lamb, the resident.
Yeah. So that started getting me sick. And, by the end of my training, I found myself really sick with depression, severe allergies, irritable bowel syndrome, to the point that I couldn't function anymore. So I went to my colleagues, gastroenterologist, a psychiatrist, an allergist, and ended up with 7 prescription medications, which I knew were not going to correct the dysfunction. They were just going to murder the symptoms. But I also knew that every time you kill a symptom with a pill, there is a chance of other symptoms. We call it side effects or negative effects or secondary effects. So knowing that and thinking of me being on 7 prescription medications for a long time just threw me off track. And I said, I don't want to do this. And I don't want to do this not only for myself, I don't want to do this for my patients either. So that catapulted me into an intense search of how to deal with my health issues in a way that didn't need 7 prescription medications. So, the most pressing symptom that I was experiencing at that time was my depression. But how did it look like from my experience? It was basically my mind didn't stop thinking. And I say my mind didn't stop thinking as opposed to I didn't stop thinking, because I realized that I wasn't really choosing these thoughts. If I had a choice, 99% of the thoughts that were appearing in my mind day in and day out, I would have chosen not to think them, because they were, self-deprecating and situation deprecating and doom predicting, and so I at one point I said, oh my God, if I am not choosing my thoughts and they're just appearing in my head, I'm going crazy. I'm going insane. I used to see crazy people in the subway talking to themselves out loud. But the only difference was that that was happening inside, in silence to other people. It was happening in my head. I was having discussions with other people in my head. So that was my most pressing problem at the time. And fearing that I was going insane, I started really trying to understand what other options I had than antidepressants, which I did take for a little bit, but I didn't really like. And so one thing led to another. I ended up stumbling upon the concept of meditation, which at the time was a kind of explained to me through books as the practice that allows one to slow and even stop the habitual negative repetitive thinking process. And that looking for a meditation teacher, I ended up in an ashram in India for a long time, where I went to learn how to meditate and calm my mind. But I was exposed there to Ayurvedic medicine and other schools of medicine. There were Chinese medicine doctors, chiropractors, naturopaths, hands-on healers, Reiki masters, you name it. And that really opened my mind. Not only it opened my mind, but it allowed me to witness the power of these things, and gave me a lot of respect for them. Being there, eating the vegetarian food of the ashram and following the advice of some of these practitioners that I was working with, I started getting better. But then I moved back to the States, and I moved to the Palm Springs area, and I worked in 4 hospitals, and I went back to eating from hospital cafeterias and running around like a chicken with no head. And the stress that, having lives in my hands meant in intensive care units and stuff. And I started, getting the symptoms that I got better from, but with a vengeance. At that time, a friend of mine who I had seen 10 days before in his usual state of madness and stress, came to me after 10 days of whatever he did that I didn't know at that time. And I saw the striking change in him. I saw he was glowing, and he had lost a lot of weight, and he felt incredible. And you could just tell that this was a different animal that I had seen 10 days before. So I asked him, "What did you do?" I said, I went to a detox center. I said, "Oh my God, I didn't know that you were into drugs." He said, No, that's not that kind of detox. He said, "You know what? Let me take you there so that you can talk to the people there." So he took me to a detox center based on juicing and colonics and supplements. And the owner was from Argentina, a neighboring country from mine. So, kind of clicked. And she started telling me about detoxification. And at the time, it sounded a little hippie-ish to me. It sounded a little bit hokey pokey. But you couldn't argue with the results that my friend had gotten. And all the other guests that I was meeting there, and then I'm very curious, so I was asking all kinds of questions, and people were there. And the longer they had been there, the shinier their glow was. So, and they were telling me, I do this every year, and I used to have autoimmune diseases or cancer or depression, and everybody was either getting better or completely resolving their problems. So I became very curious. And so this person said to me, "Why don't you do the program yourself?" And I did. And in 10 days, I resolved all my health issues. All my allergies disappeared. My depression completely gone. I lost weight. I looked and felt 10 years younger. And whenever I was walking around the hospital, everybody was asking me, "What did you do?" So I said to myself, whatever is happening here is real. This is something that I should have learned in medical school. So I really tried to understand. And at the beginning, this lady gave me books that were not written by doctors or scientists. They were, Arise and Shine. These are the kind of titles, right? And they made a lot of sense. but they were not based on science. So, I was a little bit, I was having a conflict, because for me, the most important thing
Like,
is
where's the PubMed? Where's the literature to back up what you're saying?
Yeah. Well, what is actually happening, right?
Right.
And it was at that time that somebody referred me to the AFMCP, which is the Applying Functional Medicine in Clinical Practice, this 3-day course in which they kind of give you an introduction to functional medicine. And I was just blown away. And I really, then I understood not only what was going on, but and how to put everything together. Everything that I learned in medical school, how to use that knowledge in order to understand what I had witnessed on myself and so many others, right? And that, for example, so that you can understand a little better what I'm talking about. In medical school, I had learned about the kidneys. I had learned about the liver. I had learned about the intestines. I had learned about the skin, but I didn't get a class on how all these organs participate in a system that is in charge of detoxifying, right? Detoxification was, and it still is, like kind of like this word that people don't think is real. Even experts from Harvard, from who knows where, they said, "Oh, that is all quackery. The body already knows what to do and it's doing it." But it's not true, because, for example, the liver needs to produce certain enzymes, and in order to manufacture these enzymes, it needs the raw materials, which are certain nutrients. If you're not eating them or not absorbing them, or something is blocking them, then the enzymes are not going to be produced, and the detoxification of that molecule, which the body knows how to do and is trying to do, is not going to happen. So when you remove the obstacles and you add whatever is lacking, then things fall into place, right? And this is the main principle of functional medicine that really opened my mind and allowed me to think in systems thinking. And that made all the difference, not only in my own life, but in my practice with my patients. So detoxification is something real. It's a biochemical, among other things, biochemical processes that are happening in the body, in the liver, in the kidney, in the intestines. And understanding all that and putting it all together and understanding the system really allowed me to implement certain practices and certain recommendations that help people incredibly, way beyond whatever I learned in medical school and in my years of practicing in the hospital.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. My training is as a chiropractor, and I would say that chiropractic, as you were saying, naturopathy, some of these more what would be considered complementary and alternative disciplines, we are also taught in many ways, like here is the neuroanatomy, and then here is the kidney function, and here is the liver function. And while I would argue that potentially the philosophy around chiropractic, let's say, can be more integrative and more systems-based, I think that it's only when the practitioners who are willing to, when they're in practice, to be taught about how, it's not just it's not just the liver that we have to look at, and it's not just the kidneys, it's not just the, just the skin. And we see this in medicine where there's this fragmented, we see a dermatologist when there's a skin issue, and we go to a nephrologist when there's a kidney issue. So there's all of these different fragments that tend to happen. And at least my experience has been that just getting the license to practice, it's like that piece of paper it's just the starting, right? You're just at the starting line at that point. And it's only once you've been in practice, you've had the experience with patients where you've follow the tried and true methodology that you've been taught, and you don't get the results that you're looking for, that you go looking out potentially outside of your practice or your traditional training for some of those answers, which sounds like you did when you were going to the ashram and being exposed
and especially when you're looking for them for yourself.
Correct.
Because so many doctors, they go into practice, they get their results or not, but they're making a salary and they go back home and they forget about what they were doing, right? But when it's yourself, you don't go back home and forget what you're doing.
Right. Well said.
You're suffering that problem yourself, so you're really desperate to get the results.
Yeah. So let's actually talk a little bit about detoxification. You mentioned, I wanted to just double click on it because you said, people say, oh, detoxification. And it's this like woo woo kind of nebulous term that doesn't really mean anything. So I thought we might maybe go through some of the clinical signs and symptoms that if someone, presented to you in your office.
Let's first talk about what is detoxification.
Let's do that. Let's go through the different phases of detoxification, and then we can marry that with some clinical signs. Let's talk about that.
Cellular life is an acid toxin forming process. You burn glucose in the mitochondria. You mix it with oxygen, it goes through the Krebs cycle, and you create ATP, which is the energy that the cells need in order to function. And then at the end, the waste product of that metabolic process is CO2 and water, right? Where does that CO2 go? It goes into the blood, and it's dissolved in the blood as carbonic acid. But the blood needs to get rid of it. The body needs to get rid of it. So how does it get rid of it? When the blood with carbonic acid passes through the lungs, and then there's a change in the surface tensions and things, and then the CO2 gasifies again, passes into the alveoli, and it's exhaled, right? So you breathe in air with oxygen, you exhale air with CO2. That's a detoxification process. The body needs to do it because if the CO2 accumulates in your blood, you will die from acidity and many other problems, right? Now, when you run, when you walk, when you run, when you use your muscles, the muscles burn glucose and they produce what? Lactic acid. Lactic acid is a toxin. It's a waste product of the metabolism of the muscle, and it's a toxin. When you digest and use certain proteins, you create other waste products like homocysteine, like ammonia, like all kinds of different waste products of your metabolism. And I'm talking only about 3 products, but there's thousands of them. So life to happen is an acid toxic forming process, right? And these toxins have to be gotten rid of. And that is detoxification. Now, the body also has the ability to detoxify molecules that are toxic that comes from the outside. So you have the endotoxins, mostly the waste product of your metabolism. And you have the exotoxins, right? The exogenous toxins, or xenobiotics, right? So now, more than at any time in human evolution, we are bombarded with exotoxins. We the air we breathe, the water we drink and shower with, the medications we are using so endemically, right? That are only 10% are the active ingredient. The rest are excipients, coloring agents, smelling agents, texturizing agents. Same things that we do with food, we do with medication. The cosmetics that we apply on our skin that end up getting absorbed into our circulation. The building materials with which we build the places we live in, right? Even when you get into a new car, you smell it. That smell.
That new car smell, yeah.
That people love, and then you put sprays in your hair, and then you're breathing in, and then perfumes. So all these chemicals, but mostly the chemicals that we put in our food, because we're not eating food anymore. We're eating edible products that become completely toxic. These are molecules that, like, for example, when you go to the supermarket, where most people in the modern world obtain whatever they're eating, right? You see that 90% of what you can buy in a supermarket is in a shelf. And in order to have a shelf life, they have to have certain chemicals, which prevent bacteria from growing and
degradation of the product.
And spoiling them, right? Not only those chemicals, but they also have coloring chemicals, smelling chemicals, tasting chemicals, texturizing chemicals. All these chemicals that you're eating, they're not natural. These are not foods. These are edible products. This is edible stuff. And it's only edible because the FDA and the Ministry of Health approves it, right? But it may not kill you right away. But just think of the preservatives, the things that make the shelf life longer, which are basically antibiotics, because they prevent life from growing on them. Now, when you eat them, they don't disappear from the product. They start killing and altering your intestinal flora. Nowadays, we started understanding how important the intestinal flora is for so many things, right? So if you're killing the intestinal flora with these edible products that you're eating, you are destroying basically an organ in your body that now we know is related to every other organ in the body, right? Like, for example, 40% of the toxins that you are exposed to through the food and the water, they are detoxified in the intestine by the intestinal flora. So if the intestinal flora is altered, not only it will not detoxify those 40% of toxins that you're exposed to, but it also create other toxins, because the defecation of certain bacteria is food for us, but the defecation of other bacteria is toxins for us. Now, this is not a theoretic, poetic thing. Oh, toxic, you talk about toxic relationships, you talk about toxic. No, these are molecules. These are, you have the name, the coloring agents, the text, the preservatives. These are molecules that will cause certain damage, oxidative damage. They will block hormones. They will excite other receptors. They will damage your intestinal wall. These are molecules that once in your circulation, the miraculous thing about life, about biology, about nature, is that we are equipped to deal with, I would say, 95 or more % of the toxins that were invented last week, even though our bodies have been evolving for thousands of years, right? There are some molecules that we cannot deal with. Those are the POPs, or persistent organic pollutants. But most of them we can. Now, how do we do it? 40% of them are dealt with by the intestinal flora, and the rest are dealt with by the liver and other tissues, right? How? By producing enzymes that will cause a cleavage in the molecular composition and will change the molecular composition. And then how does it change? How does the liver do this? It takes out some atoms from certain molecules and it adds other atoms that render these toxic molecules into non-toxic, and mostly also changes their composition in a way that they become hydrosoluble, meaning 90% of the toxins that we're exposed to from the outside are only lipophilic. They only dissolve in fat. We don't have any elimination system that, you don't pee fat. You don't defecate fat if you're healthy. You don't sweat fat. You sweat water, you pee water. So the toxins have to be water soluble in order to be eliminated. So that the liver turns them into non-toxic, into water soluble, and then you eliminate them, right? Now, if the liver is not producing the enzymes that it needs, then it's not going to happen, and these toxins will accumulate. What happens when the toxins accumulate? The body doesn't know how to get sick. The body is incredibly intelligent, and the only thing that we are programmed with by nature is to adapt and survive. So when the body detects a lot of lipophilic, a lot of fat-soluble molecules, what does the body do? It generates and retains fat in order to buffer the irritation, in the hopes that eventually the nutrients that the liver needs are going to be available. So the liver will be able to produce the enzymes, yes? But this is something that with our modern lifestyle, we never get to. Because people are, eat the same way their whole life, and the intestine gets even more damaged, and the immune system around the intestine starts reacting, and and inflammation is turned on, and the situation just gets worse and worse year after year of life if you don't pay attention to these things. And the reason I was so focused on detoxification is because we are at a moment in evolution when we are exposed to the most toxins than ever. And this is something that continues to increase. Because a lot of people are talking about this, but nobody's doing anything. It's like global warming. Everybody's talking about it. I just saw a video by Greta Thunberg, talking about
She's 12
how
or 17. I forget how old she is, but she's the redhead. I don't know how old she is.
She's 17 or 18 now.
Yeah.
She was talking about how we know about these things, but we're not doing anything. We're getting to the point of no return. And in health wise, we're also getting to the point of no return. And how do you see that? And how, when I was in medical school, we didn't even know or talk about autoimmune diseases. Today, everybody has them. Cancer. When I was in medical school, there was rare cases of cancer, and now everybody has cancer. So we're getting to a point of no return. Why? Because we're exposed to more toxins than ever. But the detoxification system, we are putting to sleep. How? In two main ways. One of them is we're not supporting it. We're killing the good bacteria that do part of the detoxification process. We're not eating the right nutrients so that the liver can have the substrates to create the enzymes needed. We are not eating them or not absorbing them or using those nutrients for inflammation, because all processes have to happen at the same time.
Right.
But there's limited resources, not only of nutrients, but also of energy. So when inflammation is happening, it consumes nutrients and energy that are not available for other functions. And that's why we don't think as well, we're not focused as well, we don't have energy to move as well, or we don't have energy to detoxify as well. And one of the things that we're doing that steals energy from all other systems is, as human beings, as a species, we are doing something that is different from all other species in the planet, which is we are digesting all day long. You grab on the streets 10 people at random, and all of them, I assure you, in a modern city, are in some stage of digestion. And before digestion finishes, they dump another load to be digested, right? Because we're eating 3 times a day at minimum, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, which in my opinion is killing humanity. No other animal in the planet eats breakfast, lunch, and dinner in nature. Yeah, maybe dogs and cats, that are getting as sick as we are getting. So those are the two major problems: an increasing, ever worsening level of toxicity that we're exposed to, with a decreasing level of strength of detoxification, because the detoxification systems in the body are suffering energetically and are suffering in terms of resources. And that is, I think, one of the most important problems for humanity these days. Now, from there, it can manifest in many, many ways. The toxic load that we're suffering from is not the same for everybody, but it expresses itself it manifests itself in many different ways. Some people are just having lack of energy. Some people are having depression. Some people are having autoimmune diseases. Some people are having cancers, but they all stem from two main problems: increase of the toxic load and rupture of the intestinal integrity, right? The intestinal flora, the intestinal wall, activation and irritation of the nervous system around the intestines, which is bigger than the one in your brain, and also hyperactivity of the immune system, of the enteric immune system, right? 80% of your immune system is in your gut. Listen, I'm holding, as I speak to you, a model of the gut, right? And here you see part of this here is part of the immune system in the gut. This is the yellow ones are the nerves in the gut, and the circulatory system in the gut. So the gut is where a lot of the systems meet
Converge. Yeah.
converge, and then from there you can feel the effects of their dysfunction all over the body.
Well, it's interesting when you talk about your own story with depression and with the GI issues that you had and the allergies. Of course, when you think about all of those, we have the gut-brain axis, of course, the immune system. We have a plethora like the GALT. There's a huge amount of our immune system that resides in the enteric microbiome, and you were explaining before very well. Some of the processes that happen in detoxification, like the hydroxylation and the conjugation, where we take a toxin and we make it water soluble so that it can be excreted via, the urine or the sweat. In some cases, and I think it's important to just highlight, sometimes the intermediates can be even more toxic than the actual toxicant itself. And if you don't have, these enzymes, as you were mentioning, to be able to continue to move things along. So we have like the cytochrome P450 enzymes, and then if we don't have the methylation and all of the other mechanisms that we have.
Sulfation, glucuronidation, methylation.
Right.
There's tons of reactions that all need their cofactors. Like for example, they all need magnesium.
Right.
Some of them need selenium. Some of them need sulfur. Some of them need
right.
methyl groups. So if you're not getting all these things, then you may end up with a situation in which phase 1 detoxification happens. The intermediate metabolite accumulates, which, as you said, may be more toxic than the initial toxin. And but you can't go into phase 2 detoxification because you're lacking those nutrients, or you're lacking, right. There are other problems like there are genetic problems, like MTHFRs, which are determined by your single nucleotide polymorphisms. You can find that out with genetic testing and stuff. But those are the lesser of the number of problems. The main number of problems are that we are exposed to more toxins than ever, and we're just not supporting the detoxification system as much.
Right. So let's when we think about this sort of evolutionary paradox, where we've evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to be able to get rid of toxins, you said, even ones that have been, created last week, even though, our genes and our biology necessarily hasn't been exposed to them, we have built-in mechanisms for those to be excreted. What are some of the clinical signs and symptoms that one might present with? So if I came to your office or someone was like, this, and what might be some yellow flags or some, salient clinical signs that you might be looking for? And I know that, you can certainly run detoxification as you can run testing, and you can do genetic SNPs and all of that to sort of look at, liver SNPs and things like that. But what would be some clinical evidence that you would be looking for that might indicate sluggish detoxification? And I know that's a lot. That's like, it's like everything. Like the answer could be everything.
The answer is everything. Yeah. Every symptom. You name a symptom, as obscure, as rare, or as you may find in your brain, and I can explain to you how it could be caused by like an increased toxic load and the damage that brings, and also the part of the reasons why this toxin is increased, because the nutrients that you need for detoxification are not only needed for detoxification, they're needed for many other things. So if you're lacking a certain nutrient for detox, that certain nutrient may also be part of the normal function of another system, right?
Right.
So any symptom and every symptom is or could be related in some way, directly or indirectly, to toxic load. But there are symptoms that are very common. The skin, there are two ways in which the body responds to the accumulation of toxins, two generic ways, non-specific ways. One of them is the retention and generation of fat. And the other one is the retention and generation of mucus. Mucus is also a way in which the body surrounds these toxic chemicals and buffers their irritation, right? In Ayurveda is very talked about in the Western world. Really, it's not even in functional medicine. This is talked about, but the accumulation of mucus is one of the reasons why the skin glow disappears on people with excess levels of mucus and toxicity. Why? Because it's just a matter of how light reflects. Mucus absorbs light. So when somebody has a lot of accumulation, interstitial accumulation between cells and within cells of mucus, when the light hits, it's not going to bounce. It's going to be absorbed. And so you're going to look dull in the skin, right? Not only that, the skin is going to look puffy because the mucus also retains water. And so it kind of swells and you look puffy. You know, I look puffy right now because I've been eating really badly the past few days because I'm having workers in my house. I can't really cook for myself. They're painting and they're doing. So I've been ordering food, and so I can notice it immediately in my face. You know, it's people that have increased toxicity are puffy and the skin is dull. You know, and the whites of their eyes are not as white. Right. So that is just like a ID card for increased toxicity. I can look at somebody and tell right away if they're supporting the detox systems or not. But literally anything can be. You know, the hair gets coarse and dry. Your nails feel it immediately. Your skin, those are the kind of like the general common symptoms. You don't sleep as well. You know, you lose your libido. You lose your zest. You know, this is all part of the accumulation of mucus and fat and toxins.
Yeah, in practice, I would often. It was my fibromyalgic patients where just everything hurt. The joints hurt, the muscles hurt. They always had headaches. And I have
all the non-specific stuff.
That's
right.
It's like
all
diffuse
the stuff,
systemic.
the stuff that you say, well, this could be anything, right?
Yeah.
And then but then it's not anything, but regular doctors don't think about it, and so they give it difficult names.
Right.
Fibromyalgia or whatever.
Right.
You know?
They give them big names. Yeah, it's true. And I've had some, not quite as much as you, I've had some TCM training, some traditional Chinese medicine training. And what we were taught was what you just said is they would talk about their, a person's heart shen, or like the, everything would show up in the face. So they would look at the tongue. So we would look, do you have like a white coating on the tongue? What's the shape of the tongue? Is it puffy?
And what is the white coating? Mucus, as accumulation of mucus.
Right.
So I didn't have any training in TCM, by the way. And so whatever you had more than me. I dabble in functional in Ayurvedic medicine.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right? And I'm no expert.
Worthy of the distinction. Yes. Thank you.
I'm no expert. I'm not a functional medicine doctor. I'm not an Ayurvedic medicine doctor, but I find it super interesting, super effective. And, I just steal the tools that I can as I go learning. And there's because you can understand the whole theory, right? But it all boils down to practical stuff, right?
Right. And I love with both TCM and these are thousands of years old. And I think that, my constitution tends to be, I want to hang my hat on science. Like that is my church. I want to read all the literature, but there are things that cannot be explained.
I'm not like you. I don't hang my hat on science. I hang my hat on results. And I love when science allows me to understand. But science is very flawed as well.
Agreed.
Science is practiced by scientists, and they have lots of different interests. Some of them economic, some of them egotistic, and some of them just even with the best intentions and with the best practices, it depends on who is interpreting them, right? And we see it all the time. We see all the time that even things that we've been doing and taking for granted as law by science for decades. Like, for example, aspirin. Aspirin is something that every cardiologist would put their patients on at the minimum.
The baby aspirin.
Yeah, the baby or not baby. At the minimum suspicion of the risk of cardiovascular disease or more specifically coronary artery disease, right? So to prevent heart attacks, right? Well, now after decades of that practice not even being questioned, I just read some studies that say, hey, not so fast, right? But you see it all the time. There was a time when they talked about resveratrol and how, and then the studies were flawed. And so and you can see it in the evolution. I mean, in the time that I've been in the United States, I describe the wars in the United States, right? Not only the wars with Afghanistan, Vietnam, and all that. There's wars on on foods. When I arrived in the United States, there was a war on carbohydrates, and then they took carbohydrates out of everything, right? And then they changed the war on carbohydrates to the war on fats, and they took out fats out of everything, right? And now we are on the other side of the pendulum swing. We're in love with fats. Yeah, of course we distinguish between good and bad fat, but everybody's like, oh, you have to eat more fat. So we create these wars. There's one or two studies about something, and that goes in the press, and everybody jumps on the wagon, and we don't really know what we're doing. So right. I don't hang my hat on science. I love it if science can prove things. And I love it when it's the other way, that science discovers things and that are useful. But I've been looking at other healing modalities and healing practices that science has no idea what. For example, lately I've been really interested in witnessing and studying this practice called Kambo. Kambo is the application of the poison of a certain Amazonian frog, a tree frog, a green frog. Mm. The poison on the skin is scraped out, turned into a paste, but then your skin is burned and the paste is applied on your skin. It goes directly to the lymphatic system, makes you vomit and purge. And these Kambo peptides that are apparently the active ingredient, nobody really understands how they work, why they work. But I've seen people with Lyme disease completely get rid of it. I've seen people with cancer completely reverse it. I've seen people with depression completely get over it, only by the use of Kambo. So where is science there?
Right. Yeah. Well, let me revise my statement. That's how I grew up.
You don't have to.
No, I think it's worthwhile because that's when I didn't understand something, I would always rely on the literature, like explain mechanistically to me what's happening because I don't understand this. And I think over my tenure as a physician, as someone who's had, private brick and mortar practice, there are things that I have witnessed and have been part of that cannot be explained by science. And so
it's a matter of becoming comfortable with not understanding.
That's correct. And we can move into like masculine and feminine energy, but making
sure that it's not dangerous.
Right.
Right. So because you don't want first law of medicine is do no harm. Right.
Right.
So making sure that it's not dangerous, but not necessarily having to understand everything in order to reap the benefits of it, Yeah. And also knowing that many things that we do understand, we understand incorrectly or incompletely, And so yes, I respect science. I love science, but
there are other churches you worship.
Let's put it that way.
I love that. And I would say that there's many areas that we have, like, you mentioned this Cambo. I think psychedelics is another emerging area where we don't know why. We don't know what the mechanism of action is, but people have these spiritual, mystical experiences that and it seems to be consistent among, what, irrespective of the intervention, where it's psilocybin or MDMA or, ayahuasca, or people have these mystical spiritual experiences, and we actually have
that completely transform their life and their health.
Right. That exactly. So yeah, I think that there's definitely science in many ways, I think is behind, because we always want to isolate down to one variable and manipulate that variable. But that kind of comes back to what we were talking about at the top of this conversation, in that that's not looking at the system. It's more of a mechanistic, very isolated approach versus how can this intervention influence the system as a whole. And there are many systems, like there's endless ways that you can categorize someone. You can characterize them by gender. You can characterize them by age. You can characterize them by height. You can characterize them by genetics. Like there's ethnicity, like where they live. Like there's endless ways that humans can be categorized. And with that, I wanted to, in your book, Clean, you talk about these 4 skins that we have. So I wanted to maybe go through each of those levels, because it sort of goes from like the cellular level or the skin, and sort of moves out into these sort of bigger concentric circles as we go. And I was
the 4 skins is just a way of making people think about where we get the exposure to toxins from, right?
Yes.
Well, the first skin would be your own skin. Anything that you apply on your own skin that is going to be absorbed into your circulation. That's one level. That's the first level, the most intimate level, right? And it's not only this skin, but this skin too, which is your intestine, right? Your intestinal wall. People don't think about it, but when you eat something and you see it disappear, right? You think, oh, it's inside the body, but it's not really inside the body. As long as it's inside the digestive tube, it's outside the body proper. And the lumen of the intestine is outside the body. And in order to get to inside the body, it has to go through the skin, the intestinal wall, right? So that's your first skin. The second skin is this one. Is the one that you put on top of your first skin, right? Your clothing, So that's another source of exposure to toxins that come through the detergents, the materials which you build this thing, right? The third skin is your home. And I don't know if you're aware, but 60% of the pollution of the planet comes from architecture and building, right?
Mattresses and paints and glues and all the things.
Starting with the cements, then continuing with the paints and the glues and the whatever. I see all these videos on Instagram. People are fascinated when somebody has a method of doing something, and there's a lot of videos of people installing wood floors, right? And hardwood floors, right? And I look, and there's layers of glue, and they put the hardwood, boom, and they hammer it, and boom, and they boom, and they go increasing the surface of coverage, right? Where is all that glue going? And what happens is it's there permanently, and it off gases slowly through the years, and it's not too much. It's not going to kill you in one day, but maybe in 10 years it'll give you some kind of problem. Same thing with the fire retardants in your mattresses right. So
which makes it so much harder to pinpoint, right? If you've been exposed to something for 10 years, how are you going to chronologically say, it's probably the 10 years ago that we redid the kitchen and we did all the glue and we did all the, all the things. Like, it's really difficult for an individual to actually get back to the root. Like, what was the cause when you have such a long,
in most cases, impossible. You're absolutely right. And then the fourth skin is the atmosphere, right? Which we know is completely polluted, and we're breathing in cyanide and all kinds of
benzene and all the good things,
all kinds of garbage,
PFOAs, right? And all
those are the 4 skins, which really only is like breaking down for some way of thinking, where you're getting exposure to toxins from.
So if someone is listening to this and they're saying, okay, this is me. My 4 skins are polluted. I have, skin issues. Maybe I have FM, maybe I have headaches. My bowel movements aren't what they should be. What are some best practices that you have? Well, maybe let's start with some of the tools. What are some of the tools that you like to begin to open up some of these detoxification pathways? And then we can talk about frequency and duration and all of that. But what are some of the, I know you talk a lot about fasting and different practices. What are some things that you like to employ when someone is starting a detoxification program with you?
Simply the 5 R's of functional medicine, right? Remove is the first one. Remove all the exposure to toxins that you can in your laundry room, in your bathroom, in your bedroom, in your kitchen, in your closet, and in your environment as much as you can. Air filters, water filters, right? Non-toxic detergents to wash your clothing, and non-toxic toothpaste, non-toxic deodorant, and mostly non-toxic food, right? Eat real food and not food-like products. The least packaged food possible, if not none, right? So that's remove is that aspect of, and then there is the other R, which is replace or restore. Give to the body what it needs: nutrient dense foods, real foods, right? And then also relaxation, re-inoculation, which is building back the intestinal flora, and remove, restore, relaxation, re-inoculation, and then repair, right? There are certain things that you can do in order to support the repair mechanisms of the body, right? Prime example is when you're trying to repair your gut, your leaky gut, your hyperpermeable intestine. Sometimes you need L-glutamine, which is one of the limiting factors of the regrowth of the cells of the epithelium of your intestinal wall, right? So those are the 5 steps. I describe them really clearly in my book, Clean, right? With a whole step-by-step, day-by-day program that you can do in order to enhance your detoxification system, support your detoxification system, and thus restore your body's natural ability to heal itself.
Is there a certain frequency that you like to engage in this program? Do you like to do it once a year, once every 6 months, once a quarter?
I think of it like showering, There's times that I shower every day. There's times that I shower twice a day. There's times that I don't shower for a week, like depending on what I'm doing, depending on the situation. And it's the same thing with the detoxification. Once you start understanding how it works and what it does to you, and you start understanding your level of toxicity, then you'll know. I know I need a detox tomorrow. So it'll be my second one this year, right? There's years that I don't do any. There's years that I do 4.
And do you have a preference for solid foods versus liquid? Do you have
when you're following a detoxification program, one of the most important aspects is decreasing the workload of your digestive system, because you spend a lot of energy digesting, which is what we talked about at the beginning. You're going to steal energy from many other systems. One of the ones that suffers the most is the detoxification system. So in order to decrease the workload of the digestive system, I replace certain solid meals for liquid meals. That just makes digestion easier and allows the body to use the extra energy that you save on the detoxification and repair process.
Do you also, I think that, I talk a lot about fasting in some of the protocols that I use with clients and in my memberships. I also, typically when we talk about fasting, we're talking about, allowing the digestive system to rest, to abstain from food. I think that there's also a place to discuss fasting from other toxic things, like social media can be overwhelming and toxic at times. Certain people can be, overwhelming potentially and toxic at times. Do you also, if you're engaging in, this might be what we've been discussing is more of like a biochemical reset, right? Where we're fasting and we're having, certain foods that are going to upregulate detoxification. Is there also a place for you in your programming or in the way that you potentially counsel patients to detoxify from some of these, relationships and people and things that also are
there's a whole chapter about it, right? Which I call quantum toxicity. Right?
Yes.
And yeah, it's as important and sometimes even more important than the toxic molecules. Absolutely.
Right. Wonderful.
And the tools for that are meditation, avoiding certain relationships. I mean, I have so many people that start a detoxification program just for health issues and physical molecular stuff, and then they end up separating or breaking up with their partner and or leaving their job and changing their job or even moving countries.
Yeah, I would say many times I would have chronic pain patients in the clinic, and one of the conversations that would inevitably come up is maybe it's the job, or it's like the partner, the toxic relationship, the conversation you're not having with your mother, or it's the job that you're in that is perpetuating this cycle of inflammation where you are stuck in this sympathetic fight or flight response and you're always on edge. So I think that's wonderful, wonderful advice. All right. So if people want to learn more about you, more about your work, where would you love people to check you out if they have more questions or they want to interact with you? Where's the best place?
I've written 4 books: Clean, Clean Gut, Clean Eats, and Clean 7. Clean is about detoxification and describes the detox program. Clean Gut is about gut health, gut damage, gut repair, and also has a 21-day program that supports and promotes the repair of the intestinal wall and everything else around the gut. I mean, when I talk about the gut, I talk about 4 components. I talk about the intestinal flora, the intestinal wall, the nervous system in the gut, and the immune system in the gut, right? So that's Clean Gut. Then Clean Eats is just a recipe book that gives you recipes to support eating during this program. And my latest book is Clean 7, in which I added principles from functional medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and intermittent fasting in order to accelerate and intensify, healing and repair.
Wonderful. Well, make sure that
I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter. Alejandro Junger. You can find me easily. And then I also, I have a company that I created to support these things, because a lot of people can't go to the supermarket and prepare their meals and their liquid meals and their supplements, and there's so much confusion, there's so much available that it paralyzes people. Yes. Somebody wants to start something and they don't have time to read a book, and so I created this company called Clean Program, and we provide a kit with different kits for the different programs and different supplements to support, and I curate these things myself. And not from an intellectual point of view, but from a results point of view, because I've tried everything. I chose the best of what I found. And it becomes very user-friendly, very easy to do a detox program. At least your first one or your second one. Or sometimes, I have people that do them every year and they get great results, a great way to reset, a great way to move forward in your healing journey.
Wonderful. Well, we'll make sure that all of that is available in the show notes. It has been such a delight to talk to you today. I really
Same thing. I many times I get interviewed by people that don't know anything about the subject, right? But talking to somebody that knows deeply about the subject, I mean, you're talking about conjugation, and so you really understand what I'm saying, right? So
yes,
it's a pleasure to have this type of interview too.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I receive that with love. And we'll make sure that all of this is in the show notes. And thank you so much for your wisdom, for your time, for your presence today. And looking forward to the next time we get to chat.
Thanks for having me.